This week we continue our series, David, shepherd, poet, and king. We're looking at the life of David, who was a psalmist, an author, much like our friend Bubba, and who was not only that, he was a king, he was a shepherd. But of all of those things, I think the greatest compliment that was ever given to David is that he is a man after God's own heart. And that is quite the compliment. But I have to also say he's not only a man after God's own heart, where he has many times that he is a great example for us, he's also human. And there are many stories. In fact, probably about half of the stories that we're walking through in the life of David are things we shouldn't do and ways that we shouldn't handle our lives. And how many of you are glad that somebody as powerful as David also gives us a sigh of relief to know, okay, even David jacked it up sometimes. I'm going to jack it up too. There's only one perfect one, and his name is Jesus. Amen? Today, I want to talk to you on the subject of how did I get here? How did I get here? Let's pray together. Lord, as we dive into your word, let it change our hearts. Let it shape our minds. Let it change the way we make decisions. I thank you for doing all of that in Jesus' name. Everybody said? Amen. Last weekend, I had a wild Saturday on my hands. It was supposed to be a pretty mellow Saturday. I had one soccer game that I coached last weekend, and by the way, we won that game, and just slide that in there. And so we had an early game that morning, and not only did we win, we won 7-1, I think. And so just anyway, let's keep moving. And so we won that game. It was an early morning game. And then I thought, man, I've got a really rare Saturday where I've got kind of the whole day free until that evening. And that evening I was supposed to do a wedding at a venue. And so I was like kind of laid back and relaxed until I got home, and I took a quick shower because I was really sweaty, and then I realized something horrible, and that is that my cell phone wasn't working. It wasn't responding at all. And so I could see that it was on, but I could not, like anything I did on the screen, it wasn't responding to the screen. So no touch. I could see calls coming in, but I couldn't answer the calls. And so the worst part about that is that it quickly became an emergency because the wedding that I was supposed to do, I had the address and the venue, the name of the venue, only in one place, and that was in my text messages on my phone. Now, do you see where this is headed? And so all of a sudden, I'm in a panic. I quickly go to T-Mobile. T-Mobile, which is our subscriber, they can't fix the phone. They send me to the Apple store. I have to drive to the mall to go to the Apple store, and then they're like, well, the guy does this everything the same people at T-Mobile did, which I tried to tell him, we've already done all this. But, everybody wants to do their thing and try it. And so they said, well, you're going to have to go see a genius bar. And I'm thinking to myself, yes, because I'm not speaking to a genius right now. But anyway, and so they said, you got to schedule an appointment with the genius bar. And I tell them the predicament I'm in. I'm supposed to be at a wedding tonight. I can't get to the address or the venue of this wedding. I've got to get this fixed right now. They're like, well, we can get you in an hour. Now, I'm still in like Saturday leisure clothes. And so I've now got an hour where I've got to go home and put a suit on and get ready for this wedding that I still don't know where it is. And then I've got to get from the mall to home, get ready for a wedding, and get back to the mall in an hour so I can try to figure out this whole thing. And so I go back to, I go home, I go back to the mall, I go to leave the mall. This is the kind of day it was, okay? I go to leave the mall, and when I'm leaving the mall, I parked close to JCPenney. There was like a lot of people at the mall last Saturday. I don't know why, but I parked close to JCPenney, and so I went in through JCPenney in the entrance, and I remembered, the ladies' clothes. And so there was ladies' clothes when I walked into the entrance, so I thought to myself, you park close to the women's department in JCPenney. And so when I went back out, now I'm on a time crunch here. Okay, a major time crunch. I've got an hour to get home and get back and try to figure out this cell phone thing. And when I went to leave, I went into J.C. Penney and I couldn't find the exit of where I parked. And so I literally am walking from door to door to door. And I finally said to a clerk, where is the women's department in this store? And they said, well, it's on the second floor. And I was like, well, I don't remember coming in on the second floor, but I guess I'm an idiot. I'll go to the second floor. There must be an exit on the second floor that I didn't realize that so I go up to the second floor, and it is not the exit that I need for my car. And I'm in panic now. I'm in complete panic because I've still got to go home, get changed, get back, get this cell phone situation fixed. And what I realize is I'm in the wrong store. I'm actually in Dillard's. And no wonder I can't find the exit. I'm literally in the wrong part of the mall. And I was thinking about that story. And by the way, I got the cell phone fixed and I literally, the wedding was at 6. I got the address at 5:30 and made it to the wedding on time. And so I just want to give you the relief of that, because some of you, you'd be all day thinking, did he get to the wedding? Did he get to the wedding? Yes, I got to the wedding. But I was thinking about that in relation to not only our physical location, which how many of you ever had a moment like I just described in your life? Have you ever had a moment where you walk out to a big parking lot and you forget where you parked your car? Come on. All the time that happens, because I'm on the phone all the time. So I'm on the phone, and then I forget where I parked when I come out of the parking lot. These moments that we have where we can't figure out our physical location are actually also very apropos to moments that we have where we take a wrong turn in our spiritual lives. And we literally are confused, and we are in a panic, and we're going, what happened? And where am I? And how come I ended up here? And it all happened because we weren't paying close attention to where we were going spiritually in our lives. And when you don't pay close attention physically, you're going to get lost. And when you don't pay close attention spiritually, you're going to get lost. And that's the scenario that we find today. And I know this is true because I could give you the last 13 years that I've been a lead pastor at Saints Community Church. I could give you a long list of people who used to be powerful men and women of God. They used to serve in the church. They were leaders in the church. And now they are not serving God in any way, shape, or form. And I want you to understand this today. And this is where I want you to lean in and really, really understand how important this is. Spiritual health today does not guarantee spiritual health tomorrow. Every day is its own thing. And there are so many wrong turns that we can take, and little decisions where we decide to take the wrong turn, to not prioritize God in the way that we should, to not live a lifestyle of surrender and obedience. What may seem like a small wrong turn can end up being devastating to our spiritual lives. This is where David's at. David is about to take a wrong turn in his walk with God. And the reason he's doing that is because he is weary. Everybody say weary. He is so weary. He has literally had 7 years of living in the wilderness. He is trying to feed and give supplies to over 600 men, which they estimate was about 2,000, including women and children. He's the guy in charge of feeding all of these fugitives that are on the run. They're having to set up camp and tear down camp, and set up camp and tear down camp, because they're on the run for their lives. He's tired of being hunted like a wild animal. He's literally sick of his life. And he comes to a point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. I'm weary, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and it seems like God doesn't care. And this is where we find him in our story today. 1 Samuel 27, verse 1, and David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. 1 Samuel, the sad story of this chapter, begins with this. And we're going to give you an equation. I'm going to give you an equation that I want you to write down because it's super important, because we see an illustration right here in front of us in this equation of how we end up on the wrong track in our walks with God. And the first part of that equation that I want you to write down is this. It all starts with wrong heart speak. Wrong heart speak. David, he hasn't said it, as far as we know, out loud. He hasn't said it to anybody else. He definitely hasn't even said it to God. But what he's saying to himself in his heart is, it's over. He says, he makes a choice to believe in his heart and to speak the wrong things to himself. You know what? Eventually, Saul's going to catch up to us and kill us. We are going to all die here. He's literally believing things in his heart, making a choice to have this wrong heart speak in his life and in his heart. And this is how spiritual devastation begins to happen in our lives. Many of you could look back at a time where it all started when you got off track with the wrong things you were telling yourself and that you started to believe. Because you've been faithful for a great amount of time, and things still aren't working out, and God seems nowhere to be found. And so you're speaking this heart speak to yourself, and you're beginning to believe what you're saying to yourself. David had been delivered by God over and over. He had been promised to be the king. He had God's promises and God's deliverance already had been shown in his life. But he's tired, and he's weary, and he's frustrated. And so he literally says to himself, it's over. We're going to be killed. Can I just mention, this is one of the reasons why a small group is so important in your life. Because what happens in small group is that you sit in a group, you sit in a circle, and you begin to say, this is how I feel, this is what I think, these are what my beliefs are at this current time in my life. And your small group is able, if they're a good group, they're able to step in and say, that's wrong heart speak. They're able to help you correct the first stage of the equation where things go wrong. They're able to help you correct your heart speak. David has concluded he's going to be killed by Saul. None of God's promises to be king are actually going to happen. David is thinking that his present circumstances are so horrible, and he comes to the conclusion that because the present is so bad, the future is bleak as well. It starts with wrong heart speak. But then the next part of the equation is humanistic living. Humanistic living. Write that down. Write that down. 1 Samuel 27, 1, and just part B, it says, there's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. Here's ultimately what David is saying. I can't trust God anymore. He's not delivering me. Things aren't changing. I've got to take my life and the life of all of the people that trust me into my own hands. I got to do something because God's not doing anything. So it started with him telling himself that he's going to die, nothing that God has promised is going to happen, and then it moves from his heart to his living, his behavior, his actions. You say, what does humanistic living means? Humanistic living just literally means you're living as if there is no God. You're living as if there is no God. Like everything is in your hands. It's all about what you can do, and this is what I got to do, and I got to do what I got to do because, man, God ain't doing nothing, and so I got to take matters into my own hands. And literally what this is the life of someone who says they believe in God, but they live as if there is no God. So they're saying one thing, and they're doing another. And can I just tell you this? Shocker for everybody in the room. All of us have times where we live as if there is no God. That's about how I thought it would go. I'll say it again. All of us have times where we live as if there is no God. Even though we say we believe in God, we take matters into our own hands. And can I tell you, I have been guilty of this even as a pastor, even as a leader, to say, you know what? I don't know what God's going to do. I don't know if He's going to do anything. But I can tell you one thing, I'm going to go down swinging. I can tell you one thing, I'm about to make some phone calls. I can tell you one thing, I'm about to work my way out of this situation. I'm about to lead my own way out of this situation. Now, let me be clear. This isn't a pass to not work hard and do what you got to do. This isn't like, well, I trust God. I'm not getting a job, Wayne. I'm just going to trust God. I'm going to sit in my living room on my couch. I'm going to sleep in every day. And I'm just going to trust God because I don't want to live humanistically. No, but you are living stupidly, okay? So this is not a pass to not work hard. It's not a pass to not do what you can do. What it is an ability to understand that you do what you can do, but ultimately, your life is not in your own hands. It's in the hands of God. So it's God, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do everything I got to do to fix this or to help this or to help my family or to fix my grades or, whatever it takes. I'm going to do what I can do, but ultimately, my life is not my own. I trust you. There may be some of you here that aren't necessarily a Christ follower yet. Maybe you're on the journey and maybe you're here and somebody invited you, and I don't know what your path is right now, but maybe some of the reason why you haven't said yes to serving Jesus yet and becoming a Christ follower is because you know a Christian, you work with one, you're related to one, or you go to school with one, and you know a Christian, and they don't seem to live any differently than the way you live. Because all of us have times where we live like atheists, like there is no God, like I've got to do it all. It's all in my hands. David makes a decision. I'm going to die, so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to move myself and all of my people over to the enemy, the camp of the Philistines. If you all remember the story of David and Goliath, if you don't know any other story about David, you probably know that one. What happened is Goliath was a Philistine. These are the enemies of Israel. And David says, Saul ain't going to go there. He ain't going to chase me over into the Philistine camp. He's not going to chase me into their territory, into their city. I'm going to take matters into my own hands, and I'm going to go over there. Well, what does this equal? 1 Samuel 27, 2 through 4a says, David goes over to Achish, leader of Gath. Then David arose and went over with the 600 men who were with him to Achish, the son of Maach, king of Gath. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelites, Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. David arose. He went over to the enemy's camp, but he didn't go by himself. He took his 2 wives and 600 men and all of their wives and children with him. I want to let you know something, and I really need to make this clear. We live as if our decisions only affect us. And friends, look this way. That's just not true. The decisions you make on the wrong path, to make a turn, to go the wrong direction, to shift, to be disobedient, to do something on the path that you may think, listen, it's my life, you do you. It's the famous, saying we have, you do you. Well, you don't just do you. What happens is your decisions affect your family, your children, the generations that are coming behind you. They will affect your grandchildren. They will affect your friends. They will affect anybody you have influence and leadership over. Your decisions affect a broad array of people around you. And you might think, I got to do what's best for me. No. What you need to do is what's spiritually right, not just for you, but for everybody in your sphere. David, one man, is affecting 2,000 women, children, his army that is with him. He's making the wrong turn, and it is affecting everybody around him. So this brings us to the end of our equation. If you're taking notes, the four of you that love to do that. Here's the equation. Wrong heart speak plus humanistic living equals horrible consequences that affect you and everyone around you. Wrong heart speak plus humanistic living equals horrible consequences that affect you and everyone around you. Well, what kind of consequences, Wayne? Well, that list gets very long, but we're going to at least look at the consequences that we see in our story today. I'm going to give you 6 of them in a rapid speed. Number 1, it creates a false sense of security. A false sense of security. You may take matters into your own hands, and you may look at your immediate circumstances and go, looks like it worked out. Psalm 27:4 says, and it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. In other words, David is able to go, it worked. Saul stopped following us. Our lives are in the clear. He thought, I'm safe. And I just got to tell you, sin, disobedience, getting off the path has its temporary pleasures. It may look like everything's okay. It provides a sense of relief for a short time. Everybody say short time. But in the long run, it's short-lived, and it will catch up with you. So it provides a false sense of security. Number 2, we end up submitting to our enemy and all of his causes. In the process of taking matters into our own hands, doing what we think needs to be done, not trusting God to do what he's going to do, we end up literally submitting. Now, some of you that live your lives against other human beings, political or whatever that looks like, I just have to clarify, and I felt sad that I had to put this in parentheses, we only have one enemy. It's not each other. We have one enemy. His name is Satan. And when we take matters into our own hands, look what happens in verse 5. Then David said to Achish, if I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there. For why should, now watch this now, catch this, your servant dwell in the royal city with you? David has just called himself a servant of the enemy of his own people. He has just submitted himself to the causes of the enemy. When we go off the right path, when we start making decisions that are off the path spiritually of what God wants us to do, you may not even realize it, and it might be unconscious, but you are actually submitting yourself to the enemy's causes when you do that. Number 3, it leads to a lengthy period of compromise. It leads to a lengthy period of compromise. Verses 5 through 7. David said to Achish, if I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may, what? Dwell there. Now the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. We may think, it's just a month, it's just a day here, a day there, it's just one decision. But what happens is that 1 decision can lead to a long, lengthy period of compromise in our life. Number 4, it begins to have a negative effect on your character. David and his men during this time, you know what they were? They were nothing more than armed robbers and murderers. They're fighting on behalf of Achish, who used to be their enemy. David, who used to fight wars in honor of his God, is now fighting wars for profit for his enemy, Achish. What happens? What happens is you become somebody else, and your character begins to shift in a negative way. Look at verses 10 through 12. Then Achish would say, "Where have you made a raid today?" And David would say, "Against the southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the Jerahmeelites, or against the southern area of the Kenites." David would save neither man nor woman alive, to bring news to Gath, saying, "Lest they should inform on us," saying, "Thus David did, and thus was his behavior all the time he dwelt in the country of the Philistines." So Achish believed David, saying, "He has made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore he will be my servant forever." I don't have time to go into this, but for the sake of time, those verses that we just read, here's what I want you to know. He's lying. David is actually lying to Achish to make him believe that he is destroying areas that belong to Israel. He's actually trying to make Achish believe I've abandoned Israel. I've abandoned those people. Character flaws. Number 5, as the band comes, it leads to a loss of identity. A loss of identity. I want you to write down a word this morning, and the word is duplicity. Everybody say duplicity. Duplicity simply means, according to Webster's dictionary, deception by pretending. Deception by pretending. Duplicity is when you entertain one set of feelings, but you're really operating from another. Deep inside, David is an Israelite. He will always be an Israelite. But he's pretending to be a Philistine. He's duplicitous. And those of you that have ever lived this way, you know this is miserable. When you're one thing, but you're pretending to be another thing. And what happens through this process is that there is a loss of your identity. Look at verses 6 through 8. Then Achish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you've been upright, and you're going out and you're coming in with me in the army are pleasing in my sight. For I have not found evil in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, you are not pleasing in the sight of the Lord." In other words, Achish, the king of Philistia, is saying, "Hey, I'm good with you, but my guys aren't real happy with you right now." It says, "Now therefore return and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." David said to Achish, "But what have I done? And what have you found in your servant from the day when I came before you to this day, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish is telling his guys, "Hey, David's our guy now. He's not our enemy. I know he killed Goliath. That was kind of a big thing. He was our ultimate champion, but now he's our guy. He's okay with us now. He's good with us." And Achish's guys under him said, "No, we're not okay with this. He's still an enemy of ours." So what is David at this point? He's a man without a home. He's a man without an identity. He's pretending to be one thing while being another. Number 6, last one. This is how it ends. It ends with a descent into depression. It ends with the descent into depression. Chapter 30, verses 1 through 4. Then it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the 3rd day that the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and Ziklag and had overthrown Ziklag and burned it with fire. Now, just stop right here. Ziklag is where David and his men have settled for a year and 4 months. Catch this. It is burned with fire. And they took captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great, without killing on anyone, and carried them off and went their way. When David and his men came to the city, behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him lifted their voices and wept until there was no strength in them to weep. Picture this. David comes over the hill on horseback to return from a raid. And when he comes over that hill with his men, he sees the entire area that they had settled for a year and 4 months burned with fire. And that's not the worst part. Their wives, their sons, and their daughters were gone. And the Bible makes it clear. David and his men wept until there were no more tears to weep. This is how that wrong turn spiritually will catch up with you. Is in the end, it will leave you depressed. It will leave you hanging. It will leave you with no joy left. You will look around at your life and you will say to yourself, how did I get here? How did all this happen? But our story takes a turn in chapter 30. Verse 6. David was greatly distressed. Watch this. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Now some of you go, there's the David we know. Can I just tell you something? This is the first time in 16 months that he's done that. We have no mention in chapter 27, in chapter 28, in chapter 29. There is no mention of David praying a prayer. There is no mention of David writing a psalm. There is no mention of David seeking God. There's only, I got to do this. I'm taking matters into my own hands. And then in chapter 30, when he realizes, I can't do this, it's all falling apart, he turns back to God. And of course, God listens and God understands. Because Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Here's our practical application for today as we close. Our practical application today as we close is to do the opposite of what David did. When he was weary, tired, had no fight left in him, he took matters into his own hands. He spoke wrong heart speak into himself, and he began to believe that speak. He wasn't in a good small group, y'all, that would tell him to think and talk to himself differently. He decides to trust in himself. He takes a wrong turn. And then at the end, chapter 30, 16 months later, David prays. And what I'm telling you is this. Instead of praying last, pray first. Come on, y'all. Don't wait until it's all messed up. Don't wait until you've suffered all of these consequences. Instead of praying last, like David did, pray first. Philippians says this, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by what? Prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. We see this in the life of Jesus, where David got it wrong. Jesus got it right. Jesus, in his most weary time of his whole life, when he's getting ready to be arrested, tortured, and crucified, before all of that happens, he knows he's walking into a hard time. And where do we find him? We find him in the garden, talking to his Father. Matthew 26, 36 through 39. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is sorrowful, even unto death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. David takes matters into his own hands and begins to operate from that perspective. Jesus says, this is the hardest time of my entire life, and as I'm in the very beginning of this, I'm going to, before any of it happens, pray first. Everybody say, pray first. Turn to your neighbor and say, pray first. The truth is this: pray first, pray during, pray after, pray all the time. Take your stuff to God, give it back to Him. You do what you can do, but if you grow weary in well doing and you don't think God's going to come through on your behalf, the worst thing you can do is to begin to take matters into your own hands, y'all. Pray first. Live more like Jesus than you do like David.